Hey, welcome to another episode of Purple and Bold podcast from DNR Media, the Daily News Record. I'm Shane Metlin. Katie Harper not with me today. She's traveling a little bit, but I have a guest with me to talk kind of big picture things going on right now in across all of college sports. But we're going to focus on what that means for G6, Group of Six, mid-major programs such as JMU and the rest of the Sun Belt and everything else. So I have with me today Tim Stevens, who is a media veteran who's been lots of places, the Orlando Sentinel, other Florida papers, CBS, been involved a little bit of everything as far as like media and college sports goes, and is launching Diehards now, which is going to be a homepage website. I'll let you explain it, Tim, too, but you're going to have a homepage website that's kind of national, and then similar to like what people have seen probably from 247 or things like that. It looks like you're going to cover specific teams as well at the G6 level. So Tim, thanks for coming on and tell me what exactly Diehards is if I didn't do a great job explaining.
Yeah, Shane, really appreciate that. I've been in the game for a long time. I started my career in media when I was a 17-year-old recent high school grad. I covered my first college football game, Auburn versus Texas, all the way back in the dark ages of 1987, where we did newspapers by pay stub. And my career has been adjacent to college sports since then, heavily involved in covering college sports through the digital evolution to where we are today, right? And during that time, what we really have seen is the consolidation of media coverage at that super big brand level and the hollowing out of it at the local level in many of the markets, and particularly below that big brand Power 4 level. Mm-hmm. And in places like the Orlando Sentinel and other places, I had to make some of those decisions because the economic model forced that. And, that was unfortunate, but that was really kind of the way the model worked. It was based on high volume subscriptions and high volume clicks. And, the G6 fan bases don't have those numbers. Their fans are no less passionate and engaged. So I sat on the sidelines and I watched that, and I really just said, there's a solution for this. And as tech continues to evolve and allows us to do certain things that are much more cost effective to support local publishers, I came up with Diehard Sports Network. And we will be focused exclusively on the Group of Six and the Group of Six conferences and teams, Group of Six conferences issues. And we're not going to look at things through the Power 4 lens. I mean, they have all of that. They have all the coverage they could possibly ever want. We're going to look at the world of college football through the lens of what it means for the Group of Six for those fans. We cover your team for you. And really excited to launch that. We're in early stage now. We are launching with the national site, which you can see it at diehardsportsnetwork.com right now. We're going to launch this fall in Alabama, where I'm located. We have 4 Group of 6 teams here in Alabama: Troy, South Alabama, and the Sun Belt. Your audience is familiar with them. Jacksonville State, and then UAB here in Birmingham, where I'm located. But we're also going to cover the Group of Six as a whole, and we will begin bringing on local publishers in other markets for a rapid expansion to cover these teams the way that they deserve and the way that their diehard fans deserve. That's our mission.
Yeah. And I mean, just in the time, a team that you cover, Troy, was here in Harrisonburg for the Sun Belt Championship game just a few months ago. And just in that time, like, there's been so much on that national scale regarding like the Group of Six. It was, will they really let two teams into the playoff? Will they change it now that they have gotten 2 teams in the playoff? I mean, the ACC here at their meetings is like, we got to change our tiebreakers because they got another team. Yes. And all that stuff is happening beyond, playoff expansion, NCAA tournament expansion. Like, it's hard to, that seems like that was just the other day that we were covering that game. And, obviously covering the games is huge, but like, there's so much stuff that's been off the field. Like, that game, like,
being a grizzled veteran, Shane, I what I've come to learn in covering this since I was still a teen, actually, is that there's actually nothing new These are the same arguments that have existed in college athletics, this push and pull between the highest resourced programs and those underneath them, have existed since the first time somebody pointed a television camera at a field and said, we think we can make some money off this. And some of the framing changes, but the underlying issues have always been the same. And as I'm now back into covering this on a daily basis and really looking at these issues, what I find is that I can pull my old columns from the 2000s, change a few names, and I could probably republish them word for word. There's not really that much changed, even though it feels like it is existential all the time, right? The real issue here is not even the labels of Group of Six or Power Four. What we really have is a stratosphere in college athletics between four subgroups. And those are the 20 big brands that matter. We all know who they are. Okay. And then where you fall next is determined not by a conference patch, but by how close they're willing to allow you to associate those 20. Okay. The next subgroup would be they're willing to play them home and share money with them. Okay. The next group would be, well, we're not going to play you home and home, but we'll play you to come here. And then the last group is we'd never play you at all because you're so insignificant. Okay. That's really where that falls. And we talk about haves and have-nots, but the real battle always along has never been about competition. It's always been about competition for power, which translates into competition for money between those who have it. And the real fault line is those who get to share it versus those who have to bootstrap it. And if you really want to look where the fight takes place, it's not with those 20 because they're going to make their money no matter what. It's about who gets to be directly associated with it, because they have a different set of rules than those that don't, as JMU Wells knows. JMU knows, well, if we do everything they say, they're just going to change the rules, steal our coach, steal our players. And if we win long enough in spite of that and they get tired of us and they have to, they'll invite us in. That's it. That we've seen that replay since 1978 when they split the divisions. Same path.
I think the worry at JMU and places like that right now is, are they going to invite anybody else in?
Yeah, will there be a spot?
Same path that a Utah or a TCU has taken in the past. And I think probably for JMU fans, they have to wonder, will they end up with the same results from taking that path that other schools are able to
I wrote a pretty in-depth column about that very issue, Shane. People can find it on diehardsportsnetwork.com. The big issue for the G6 programs in this particular vein is that they've never been allowed or had a path to compound their success. Okay. As soon as you start stacking success, you're probably going to lose your coach. You're now, because of the portal, you're probably going to lose your players. And then it's really difficult to stack it together to get to that point where you can win your way there, because you can't really win your way there. You're only still going to get there out of their convenience. Okay. In other words, somebody moved up there that created a spot. If there's nobody moved to create a spot, I don't care what you win, they're not letting you in. Okay. So that's really the system that has existed all along, and no amount of incremental change, access or not access, one team or a loophole for two, or, well, you've ranked it. None of that stuff changes the dynamic, as you're only getting in the club if they have to take you. You can't really win your way there. You can be positioned closest to the door, but somebody has to move so that they open the door.
Yeah. But for those teams that haven't gotten through the door yet,
yes,
and the ones that you're going to cover,
yes,
obviously, I think if you're taking on this, you found that, hey, there is a fan base there, there's a market there.
Yes.
And maybe it wasn't the market that works for an On3 or a metro newspaper that has 5 colleges in their coverage spectrum or whatever, like the Orlando Sentinel, things like that. But like, what convinced you that there is the market there for you to take this on, and that, hey, people are going to read what I have to say and what other
That is a great question, and really, what it led to for us as I was evaluating where we go with this. Technology enables the math to change. Okay, technology and some of the things that we do, and I'm not talking about AI writing articles. I'm talking about being able to build tools that allow a small team and local publishers to scale themselves in a way that they can run an operational business very cost effectively, allows you to build the runway to grow that audience. Okay. And it allows you to deeply engage that audience. You're not going wide and shallow here. You can build a really highly engaged community around this team who live and die their team just as much as the biggest brands. In fact, I would argue in many cases they're more passionate, because it's not easy to be a G6 fan when the world is stacked against you, right? It is not. It is very easy. No offense, I'm not picking on any school. It's really easy down here in Alabama to be an Alabama fan. You're hardly ever going to lose. You're hardly ever have a day Saturday that you feel bad. If you do, it's because you didn't win by enough, not because you didn't win. And your biggest complaint is going to be that you feel like you somehow got hosed at the end over a poll or something. I mean, like your existence is going to be pretty happy most of the time. It's not easy to be a G6 fan. You're truly invested in it. And the old model didn't reward that. And what we're building does.
Yeah. Excuse me. What does what you found from kind of diving into what the market is for these, does it tell you anything about some of the things that are happening nationally where,
Oh yeah,
we're looking at, this week, it's a new bill going through the Senate. And one thing they're talking about is if you pool media rights, what's that mean for the money for everyone? And, I would have to think what you're diving into sort of reflects that a little bit. Like you said, there's 20 brands that like probably drive all the money for TV and things like that. Mm-hmm. And then if you did start to look into it, what is what you've seen told you about where these G6 programs would wind up if something like that came to fruition?
Okay, so the fault line that that's always been in play and is still the big issue is, what does access look like, right? Mm-hmm. And do the G6 programs and even a large percentage of the Power Four, okay? Let's not pretend all Power Four are created equal, okay? They're not. And in fact, I would argue that probably 20 to 30 of the Power Four, without the direct association that is boosting their brand, would look a whole lot more like the Group of Six. Okay, they're just, nobody's turning on the television to watch 2/3 of those teams, and I can show you the ratings on that now. I went back and looked all the way to the beginning of deregulated television. If you want to look at the audiences that had 4 million or more watching, which was kind of to me the magic number, you can count on your fingers and toes and have plenty left over a number of those regular season games that drew 4 million that didn't involve one of those 20 schools we all can name. Okay. Nobody's watching Big Ten football to watch a third of those teams. They're watching them play one of those teams. Okay. So that's your fault line. And that's where a lot of the political movement is, because that middle tier wants to protect where they are. And below below the G6, you got the FCS that wants to protect where they are and keep you pulled closer to them. Okay. So that's the accordion fight that's been going on all along, is nobody actually wants to break the system. They just want to get on the right side of it and then pull up the ladder. Okay. That's really what we got. And so looking at this landscape, some people are really pushing for a G6 only playoff. Right. And I don't think that conversation in and of itself is a bad idea, but I think it's a horrible idea for the G6 as a standalone G6 playoff. It's basically saying, take your antitrust exemption and do what you're going to do. We give up. Okay. And I don't think that's what the G6 want. Do I think there's a better postseason opportunity for the G6 that could be a separate playoff? Sure. But it's got to still be attached to the CFP, or it's got to be in addition to the CFP for the teams that didn't make the CFP, and it's just looking at a smarter postseason rather than bowls. Okay, that's where you're probably going to go. But the big thing is right now the G6 have lost so much political power. Okay, the Big Ten and the SEC have all the political power, all the rules, all the authority to change the rules rests really with what they want, and that means they can probably run roughshod over things right now, which is kind of what's happening. And one of the things that I think the G6 schools have really got to look at is rather than fighting for scraps amongst each other, to be the one that pulls up the ladder, they need to be talking about keeping the ladder. Okay. And they need to be working together on it. They really need to be working together to make sure that their interests are not simply passed over in creating what is next for college athletics and how it is structured. If you sit back, it's going to be too late. And the Big Ten and SEC have not necessarily even selfish reasons for why they're pushing some of the things that they're pushing, because they have such huge legal risk the way things are. They're the ones that are going to have to do all the paying when these lawsuits keep stacking up. And so there it's not, but there's also not going to be any altruism with it either. They have their interest and they're driving the bus. But the G6 have got to band together here and make sure that their voice and their issues are not simply pushed aside and then they're told what the outcome is after the fact, which is what we just saw with the last rule change. They literally were told after that rule change was made.
Yeah, and it went from it's a certain number of champions, and it doesn't matter people always looked at it as like, okay, there's one spot for the G6, and that was never the case before. It was like the highest rated champions, and it in theory, Conference USA, the Sun Belt, and Mountain West could have had 3 of the 5 highest rated champions. Yes. They could have, but then as soon as that happens, that 2 of them are in there, then they want to actually define the line, which I think that's got to be worrisome to a lot of people like us who follow these programs, and whether we're diehard fans or not, your website is named. I went to a P4 school. I cover a G6 school now. I can see the need for the ecosystem to exist and have all of that. And I think it's a little short-sighted to start to run these programs out of your ecosystem. And eventually, what are you going to feed on?
Yes, it's, and I keep coming back to so many of these issues are not new. They're just reframed in some modern framing. Okay. But the underlying issues still exist. And, I first, I know I'm on a JMU centered podcast here. I want to give a tremendous credit to JMU and JMU athletics. I mean, they committed to this FBS move. They've done it right. They've built, the fan base has responded, and they have immediately established themselves as one of the leading G6 athletic departments, not just football success, but one of the leading athletic departments, and that commitment's there. And, that's made them a very valuable member of the Sun Belt and definitely has them on the radar of other things down the line. Okay. My challenge to JMU would be lead in the G6. You've made this evolution. You've made the turn. You bootstrapped it up to the next level, but you can't bootstrap it up to the P4 because of the institutional structures, right? And that's part of what's going to be changed. Are we a meritocracy or not? And the reality is that college athletics in many ways has never been a meritocracy at all. Okay. It's never really been that. We've given lip service to it. Okay. I would also say, all things not being critical, I'll speak a little bit about. I had a big debate about this with one of my colleagues. We said, and this will be familiar to everybody there, is Indiana a Cinderella story? Okay, we had a pretty big debate about this, and I argued, in no way is Indiana a Cinderella story. They're a compelling story. They're maybe an underdog story, but they are not a Cinderella story, because Indiana received checks totaling a number that starts with a B over the last 40 years to be the lowest performing power conference football program in the last century prior to Coach Sick going up there. Okay. So I'm sorry, you can't be Cinderella when you were cashing Michigan and Ohio State checks to lose to them 78% of the time. Okay. Like that's not Cinderella. What that was the frat house finally falling up. Okay. All right. The lazy guy over there in the frat house on the couch fell up to CEO level, because in the history of 100 years, they made one amazing hire and he brought a bunch of good players with him. And he did what he does, which is be the real deal coach that everybody up there knew real quickly he was. Okay. So can't call that Cinderella. Now, is that possible in the G6? Cinderella is possible in the G6 because that's a true bootstrap. Nobody gave you anything. And then as soon as you started to earn it, they're going to change your rules. So that's bootstrapping. I don't want to hear about any bootstrapping over there in the P4. Okay. Nobody bootstraps over there. They coattail. Very different thing.
Yeah. Well, before I let you go, tell everybody anything they need to know about Diehard Sports Network. Find the work there, what to look out for in the future too, because I know you're getting started. I know more and more coming. So just tell people what to look out for.
Really appreciate it, Shane. Thank you for having me on. Appreciate all that you do. As a former sports editor of papers and president of the Associated Press Sports Editors, really love to see local journalists covering their team. I know how hard you work. I hope your listeners appreciate you, because I know how hard you work. Okay. And I know how you work. You're working for them. You're working to keep them informed on their team. But diehardsportsnetwork.com is where you can check us out. We're in the early stages. We're open to story ideas and suggestions. We're looking for local publishers. There's the form on there if you're interested in being a local publisher. We will be adding those. We'll be launching the G6 Diehard podcast very soon. So be on the lookout for that. And you can sign up for the G6 Diehard newsletter right now, which we'll be launching. That will be a daily G6 focused newsletter to keep you up informed, not only about things with your team, but about things that are going on around the G6 and important to the G6, developments in college athletics and things like that. So diehardsportsnetwork.com is where we're at. We're also on X, and we really look forward to engaging with JMU fans and, of course, amplifying some of the great coverage you're doing up there, Shane. Just really appreciate it and excited to get going.
All right. Thanks, Tim. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
Hey, so thanks to Tim Stevens for coming on and talking about Diehards and what they're doing to cover G6 football. They're going to get more in depth with the Sun Belt specifically, because a few of their early sites that they've got in their network are going to be Alabama based, where Tim is, and that includes Troy and South Alabama. And I would imagine they're going to have sites dedicated to a lot more Sun Belt teams in the near future. So that'll be pretty cool. In the meantime, things that we talked about that kind of applied to recent news for JMU. We'll talk more about this with Katie when she gets back on the podcast next week. But recent news for Dukes, they add another game with UVA. So that means a UNC game, it gets moved to 2031. They will play UVA in 2028. So they have, outside of this year now, that JMU has P4 games booked on the schedule for several years out here through 2031, I believe. But to get back to Charlottesville, I think is exciting for everybody. Obviously, we all remember a couple years ago, JMU goes there. They win a thriller after a rain delay, a lightning delay that really left the stadium almost all purple for the end of that game, as JMU makes a late drive to win by 1 point. So that'll be a rematch in Charlottesville against a UVA program that right now, JMU obviously hasn't dropped off the table. They still want these games against P4 programs, thinking they have a chance to win those. But But, UVA program should be in a better place by the time that game comes around. So really looking forward to that from a football perspective. But, based on some of the things that we just talked about with Tim, how money drives everything, really. You look at JMU's success and lack of success when it comes to scheduling these types of games. Obviously, they got, bought out of a game that was on the schedule against Virginia Tech. So it's interesting that the Hokies back out, but the Cavaliers jump back on. I put this out on Twitter. I think a real reason for this is simply Virginia Tech has continued to sell tickets when they haven't been very good. They will sell tickets to make a profit, whether they're playing JMU, whether they're playing Akron, whether they're playing VMI or whoever. It hasn't quite been the same for UVA. So there is that risk of you play JMU, you allow this team that is just down the road, that is kind of an upstart, kind of moving into your marketplace as JMU has moved into the FBS. And, you run the risk of losing to that team. Frankly, I'm not saying JMU definitely will beat UVA when they play again, but it is a risk for a team like UVA to play JMU, knowing that if you lose it, you're going to hear about it. Your fans are going to be upset. Your donors are going to be upset. Your coaches are going to be under pressure. That is a big reason why they don't want to play the in-state teams as much as others. But for UVA, where they have not sold out Scott Stadium a lot in recent years, it holds about 60,000. There's not been too many games that have had more than 50,000 in the stadium in recent years, other than Virginia Tech games and that JMU game 2 years ago in Scott Stadium, which was, pretty darn full. And there was a lot of purple in there, but all that purple money went to UVA because they bought those tickets. They spent money in the concession stands. They paid to park, all that stuff. That's got to be why they want this game. Also, they're paying less for it. You're going to pay, just talking about group of 5 teams that UVA's played in recent years. They've had Akron come in, and I haven't looked at the contract specifically for that game, but a game like Akron, a game against a MAC team, a game against, another Sun Belt team that's not in state is going to cost a program like UVA probably $1 million or more to get them to come play you at their place. JMU is doing it for $800,000. That is, a discount because they want this game. If you're JMU, and if you're UVA, then that is 20,000 more people in the stadium than you would probably have against, Ohio or Akron or UMass or any team like that. 20,000 more people in the stadium, you're making a bigger profit because you're paying less and you're selling more tickets. It's just that simple. So if you're wondering why UVA agreed to play this, that really has to be the reason at this point. Outside of that, not a ton as we kind of get into the start of summer. Baseball season ended for JMU, lackluster end there. Don't have to dive too much into that. We'll wait and see what happens in the offseason. If there's any major moves as far as, the bat and ball sports. For the Dukes, summer basketball is pretty much on the way. I think a lot of the women's players are already in town. They're going to get the men's team here in town soon in the next few weeks, I think. And you're going to start seeing practices and workouts and stuff for a revamped JMU men's basketball team, where the roster is now pretty much in place. We can dive into all those new players, new faces when Katie comes back. But, depth at guard, some experience at guard. They go out and get a few bigs that can do it. They're not going to be as deep, I think, in the front court and the post, but they're going to have some big wings. They're probably going to have some really good rebounding wings. They could potentially put a lineup out there where, you're 6'4", 6'6", 6'7", 6'8", 6'11", across the board, and look really big compared to a lot of Sun Belt teams. So we'll dive into each player and stuff a little bit more in a future podcast this summer. And we'll talk more about summer stuff as, we'll have football players in town. It's 100 days now until football season starts, under 100 days. I think yesterday was day 100. So we're in that countdown of under 100 days until the football season starts for JMU, coming off that college football playoff appearance. And so if you're in Harrisonburg, drive by Bridgeport Stadium, you'll see a lot more signage for that, including decorating the whole back of this video board at Bridgeport Stadium. The crane was there yesterday putting that up. So check that out if you're in town. But in the meantime, like, subscribe, all that stuff. Please subscribe. YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you are catching this, please subscribe and help us out there. And in the meantime, thanks for listening.